This is a vacuum breaker. Now, vacuum breakers are, by law, required on all dish machines. And the idea of a vacuum breaker is it allows the water to flow through. And when water flows through it, it comes up and pushes a float that's inside of this vacuum breaker up and seals the water from being able to get out. And the water flows down here and goes down into the dish machine. But sometimes what can happen is that if you're in a hard water area or the vacuum breaker starts to wear, the float can start to leak. And you'll start to get water coming out of here when it is pushed up. Now, inside the vacuum breaker, if I just twist the top off, you can see here's the lid of it, and there's a little seal that goes around here. And you'll notice that this is all brass. And inside is the float. And this is the part that usually goes. So it's simple to repair this. All you need to do is take it apart and buy a repair kit. And this float goes in, and it sits right on in here and goes up and down in that little pin, just like that. Now I can pop this into place, put this back into position, and screw it back down, and it's ready to go. This is the freshwater solenoid valve. Now the freshwater solenoid valve, how it works is as the water comes to here, it can't pass the solenoid unless this coil activates. What happens is when the signal comes from the control box to tell this to come on, this coil magnetizes and it lifts a little piston that's inside of here up, and it takes the pressure off of the diaphragm and it allows it to allow the water to flow through. So let's take this apart, because what can happen is sediment can flow through here, or the part can wear out eventually, and sometimes this diaphragm needs to be replaced or at least taken apart, and you have to take sediment that might get in that valve and clean it out and put it back together. So the first thing we're going to do is we pop the little red cap off the top, and then this little plate that sits on here needs to be slid forward. Okay, you can see that it's elongated so that it locks into place. And now I can pop the coil off the top of the solenoid. There's a little washer that sits down here on the bottom that you can also take off, and make sure you put that back on, because that puts tension on the coil. You want to make sure that your coil is very tight on this armature for a long life. Now I'm going to undo the 4 7/16 inch bolts, and of course I'm going to shut off the water, which I've already done. I don't have water hooked up to this machine now. But if you do have water hooked up, as you normally would when you're doing this, make sure that it's shut off, and you flip the fill button up while the machine is still on to take any pressure off of this valve, so that when you open it up you don't get water all over yourself, especially if it's hot water, and burn yourself. And I'm keeping pressure on this so that the valve doesn't spring apart, because there are 2 springs inside of here. It's not too much pressure, as you can see. It's not going to fly on you, but you want to make sure it stays in position. And I like to lift this up and keep the diaphragm in place. You notice when I take this off that there's a bleed hole in here. I've got water inside the valve too. Now this bleed hole, when it goes back together, needs to be on the discharge side. But let's take this valve apart so we can see what's inside. This is the diaphragm, and this is the spring that puts tension on the diaphragm, and this is the piston that magnetizes, that sits inside of this armature, and the spring. So if I had a problem here, I might have something stuck inside of this valve, and the easiest way to flush out a valve is to simply put this back on, just put a couple of bolts back in it and tighten it, and turn the water back on and allow the water to run through the valve with the solenoid, with all the solenoid parts or the diaphragm parts disconnected from it. That'll take any sediment that might be in there out, let it run for 15 or 20 seconds, the water back off, and then just reverse the procedure. So now I'm going to put this little spring in. You'll notice that it's tapered at the top, and that part goes into the top, like so. And then the spring is also tapered, and the small part goes towards the top of the valve, and then we'll put the diaphragm in. Now I only have to be careful to put the bleed hole on the discharge side. If you look closely at the valve, you'll see that it says in and out. Make sure that the bleed hole is on the outside. Doesn't matter which side, as long as it's on the outside. Now I put this back into place and reverse the procedure by putting the 4 bolts back in. And I'll tighten these up a little bit. Because they're sitting on a rubber diaphragm, you don't want to really over tighten these. You just want to tighten them up till they start to feel snug, and then just give them about a quarter turn. If you over tighten this, you'll expand the rubber in the diaphragm and may cause a problem in the operation. I put the spring load washer back on the place of the armature. Put the coil back on. Put my cap on in its place, and I just slide it back so it locks in. And I put my red cap back on, and turn the water back on, and we're ready to go.